Hello, my name is David Ades. I'm a poet based in Sydney and the host of a monthly poetry reading series called Poets Corner, in association with WestWords in Parramatta in Sydney's West. WestWords is Western Sydney's literature development organisation. Poets Corner is part of WestWords' public programming that celebrates the richness, diversity and insight that literature offers. Especially in these times, we thank the ongoing support of Create New South Wales, the Cultural Fund of Copyright Australia, City of Parramatta Council, Blacktown City Council and Campbelltown City Council, as well as the many project partners that have enabled us to continue to provide opportunities to writers and audiences. We hope that this new world will see a sharing and a closeness of spirit. Each month, I invite a poet to read poems and talk about them for an hour or so around a theme of the poet's choice. Our guest poet today is Ouyang Yu, who will read poems and talk on the theme of poetry in the making, from mouth to poetry, how to make instantaneous poetry bilingually. But first, an acknowledgement of country. I'm recording this from Beecroft in Sydney. Ouyang is recording from Melbourne. I would like to pay my respects to and acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging of the Wallamita people, the traditional custodians of the land in Beecroft, and of the Bunurong, Boon Wurrung and Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land in Melbourne, and to acknowledge also that they are the sovereign owners of their land which has never been ceded or given up. Ouyang Yu came to Australia in mid-April 1991 and has since published 139 books of poetry, fiction, non-fiction, literary translation and criticism in English and Chinese languages, including his award-winning novels The Eastern Slope Chronicle, 2002, and The English Class, 2010, his collection of poetry Songs of the Last Chinese Poet, 1997, and his poetry book Terminally Poetic, 2020, that won the Judith Wright Calanthe Award for a poetry book in the 2021 Queensland Literary Awards. Ouyang's book website can be found at www.huangzuran.com, and the details of that will be posted with this podcast, so you can access his books. Ouyang is shortlisted for the Writers' Prize in the 2021 Melbourne Prize for Literature and won the fellowship from the Australia Council in 2021 for writing a documentary novel. Hi, Ouyang, and welcome to Poets Corner.
Hi, David. Thank you so much.
Before I ask you about your theme, poetry in the making, from mouth to poetry, how to make instantaneous poetry bilingually, I want to ask you how many languages you write in.
I basically write in Chinese and English, and in the process of writing my documentary novel, I found that I was actually able to write in French because a couple of my diary or journal entries were done entirely in French. And that was more than 35 years ago. Oh. So it brings back all the memories because I was fascinated with the French language. I was able to read some works written in French when I was in my university days. And then I went on to write, practice writing in French as well.
How do you choose which language to write in?
Well, I guess I was a little bit ambitious when I was a university student. I studied French, German, and the Japanese. But in the process, I gave up on the Japanese because it was too similar to the Chinese. But then it was so different. So I would go for something that is very different from the Chinese language, and that would make it easier. Yeah.
I want to unpack your theme a bit, if I can.
Yeah.
What do you mean by poetry in the making, from mouth to poetry? Is that about poetry for you being close to spoken language?
Well, let me put it this way. I have made a comparison. That is, you just measure the distance between your brain and your mouth. Is this long? Now, 2 hands with 10 fingers on the keyboard, that's a long distance, from the tip of the middle finger right to your brain. That's a long distance. So what is faster? Of course, the mouse. The mouse is faster than the fingers. And what happens with me is that with the mobile phone, everything is possible. For example, this has been going on for years now. If I do my daily walks, I go out, carry my phone, and that is when as soon as I go outdoors, poetry comes to me. In the past, particularly when I was driving on the freeway, there was no way of doing poetry because that is the best time. When you are driving at about 100 kilometers an hour, poetry just comes rushing at you. But how can you do it? You can't do it. You have to wait until you get home, or you simply just stop by the roadside and write that down. But you just can't do it. Occasionally I do that, but I always feel there's a lot of regrets. The best poetry, always you lose it on the way. By the time you arrive, you forget everything. Or you remember, you keep reciting to yourself a few words like a refrain. Then with the memory, so when I did my PhD at La Trobe University, when John Barnes, my supervisor, was teaching Kenneth, what's his name? Kenneth Lesser was talking about his memory as one of the drivers for his poetry. I was a student. I didn't say anything, but I had my doubts. I don't rely on memory. That I want something instant. And with the arrival of a mobile phone, that's done because you put on the speech recognition.
Yeah,
you start speaking into it, and it's instantly turned into words. You do a little bit of editing, of course, as you go along. But on average, you go out for half an hour or 1 hour walk, you could get about 3, 4, 5, 6 poems. Short, long. Sometimes they turn out to be very good. It's very short.
If you get a chance to listen to the podcast we did with Anthony Lawrence, he talked about writing whilst driving with a pen.
That's what I did too. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, writing while you are driving, because I didn't touch upon that. I actually found my own way of how to catch poetry while driving.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So this dovetails into your term instantaneous poetry. You want to get it, you want to capture it as soon as you get it in your head.
And let me talk about recall something that happened to me in 1995 when I came here in 1991, and in 1995, after I finished my PhD, I went back to China for a research trip, and I happened to buy a mini recorder. That's just about a little smaller than the mobile phone, and with tapes. What I found was when you go out on a train ride, sitting by the window, that is the best time when poetry comes to you. But then you don't have a pen, or you have a pen, you don't have pieces of paper. You can't do anything. But with that tiny tape recorder, I sit by the window, I speak into it, I record it. That's one thing. And also the best time for poetry is when you switch off the lights at night, lying in bed, before you go to sleep, half awake, half asleep. That's the time when poetry comes. Right in the dark.
Yeah,
you can't. As soon as you turn on the lights, it's gone. But with that tape recorder, you speak into it, you record it, and then you just throw it aside and just forget it. Next day, you turn it on, you have one of the best poems you've spoken.
I'm going to have to revisit my writing practice, clearly. But how does that idea of instantaneous poetry, though, sit with the labour, the work of poetry?
How do you mean? I don't understand what you mean.
Well, I mean, you hear of poets who do 20 drafts of a poem, for example.
No. I hate the idea of 20 drafts. No, I don't. The best poem, only one draft. Don't tell me this poem I've done 100 drafts. That's shit. To me, a lot of poems that are overdrafted, it's absolute crap.
Yeah, you can ruin them.
I have to say this, it's absolute crap. I have to say the real best, it's like love making. You don't say in the middle of love making, let's just revise it. Let's do it. No way, you just carry it right to the end. You do it and finish it straight away. You say, right. I have done this, the best session of my love making at the end of 100 times of revision. I don't believe you.
When you refer
got to be natural, spontaneous, straight away. That is the best poetry. It's like water that comes down off the cliff.
I love it when it happens. Doesn't happen to me.
That's what it's all about, poetry. We make poetry so difficult just so that we can appear as if we were superior. Poetry has to come down to that level.
When you refer to bilingually, is that referencing the work of translating poetry? Is that what you're talking about there?
No. In my, there's a lot of things to be said about this. That, for one thing, I think things come too easy. Now with Google Translate, you do a poem, you put it in, you get the result. No way, I want to make it so difficult that Google Translate can't do anything. I write in a way that the poem combines words of English and characters of Chinese to merge into one, so that the monolingual people will be, of course, mystified by the other language. That includes the English-speaking people and the Chinese-speaking people. So each party will inevitably lose something. But for the bilingual, they appreciate the subtleties that come out in the language. And the machine translation will definitely be mystified because it doesn't have a brain, or it has a preset brain. It doesn't know about the innovative parts of it. And that is what I always strive for. Poetry has got to be so innovative that it defies things mechanical.
Now, rather than ask you during your reading today how individual poems fit with the theme that you've chosen, can you tell us how the poems that you have selected to read to us as a whole fit with the theme?
Yeah, it's basically those poems. The beginning, the first couple of poems were actually my self-translations. By self-translation, I mean I wrote the poems in Chinese or I wrote the poems in English. Then instead of getting someone else to translate them, I do the translation myself. And a lot of people, poets, have been doing that. What is that? There's quite a few. Samuel Beckett did his English poems, then translated them into French and backwards. And those poems were written as early as the 1980s, in the early 1980s, while I was in China. And then when I came to Australia, I translated them into English and sent them as part of my submission.
All right, let's read some.
Do you show them there, or do I just simply bring them out? But if I bring them out here, you can't read them, can you? Or
No, you don't need to worry about that. This won't be posted until a few days, and it'll be added in, so it'll be shown on one side of the screen
Right.
when it's published. Yeah. So
And when can you read my text?
Yeah, I've got your text on my screen.
I see. So the very first one is untitled. I often feel people go to bed too early. They have lost the wakefulness of the sleepless. The dreams stuck on them like too much fat. They do not experience the mysterious stillness of the night that enables me to hear voices from time immemorial and thousands of miles away. Even less do they see the meteor that cuts open the night sky and instantly sends out a brilliance more beautiful than the day. I often feel that I am as long as the night.
I know that you've written thousands of poems, and it must be hard to find a title for each one of them, but is there a reason for having it untitled?
I wrote many poems with the title like untitled. And the reason is there's no reason. Because it's to aim at giving each poem a title, for me, is too deliberate. As I said, I use the word spontaneous. If there's no title, simply there's no title. And I will use that as a title. Untitled for 100 times already, something like that. Untitled again, I'm afraid. This one has to be untitled. If there's no title, that could be serving as a good title too.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to give you another title. That would be a title.
True. I'm interested, Ouyang, in your writing practice. Do you, and you've alluded to this already, but do you often write in the mysterious stillness of the night?
As a student, I went to bed very late, often near midnight, and I guess that particular one has a lot to do with part of my life then.
Is the stillness of the night a source of inspiration to you?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, many of my poems, particularly written in Chinese, are about the night, night thoughts, night feelings, and night experiences. And you could detect a note of the mysterious and the lyrical, because I wrote the poems in my mid to late 20s. I would not write stuff like that anymore. I can't. Because 45 years have gone. Yeah. I'm not that young anymore. I don't have the young feelings, young thoughts.
You're not the same man.
Not the same man. No, that man was gone, already dead.
Many poets have said that writing poetry is often a mysterious process. How important is the element of mystery to you in writing poems?
I don't think it's a mysterious process. Not at all. Poetry just happens in all sorts of ways. Like a found poem. You read a novel, and all of a sudden you are caught by something there that you say to yourself, "I'll find this as a poem." In Chinese and English, I do that all the time, and even in the conversation over the dinner table, I could say, "What you just said it's good poetry. I'll just write it down."
I just take that.
And that happens when I talk about the instantaneous. I actually many years ago I had another description of my poetry as in situ. The in situ poetry that happens across the board, on flight, on board an airplane, over a dinner table, any situation. except as I said to Martin, Martin Harrison, when he was alive, when we met in Sydney, I said the only situation when you can't write in situ poetry is when you are in the middle of making love. You know what he said? He said that's possible because you use a pen and write something on his back. I thought that was a great line, actually. And I actually wrote a poem about it. Yeah. Because what he said is poetry itself.
Yeah. Well,
that just comes off the top of his head.
The in-situ
you need to write so quickly, something comes over your head, just put it down. And it's sometimes very good poetry.
All right. Would you like to read us the next one?
Yeah, Song for an Exile in Australia. In the lovely season in Australia, the body is passing through the sun of spring, decaying gradually, disconnected with life. So I cover up every phase of clocks to forget time, to forget every phase that lifts up from under the white shroud of corpses. The spring has lost its power of medium, and the body can't understand its own meaning. Woodenly, I wait for the coming of dusk, knowing very well that nothing will come out of it, like every disappearing season that will not leave her shadows. In the poemless season in Australia, I read my poems of the past, like a stranger in hundreds of years, reading books left to him by his ancestors. I see thousands of lines shoot past the edge of dreams, but my paralyzed brain can't pull itself out of the wheelchair of imagination, like my decayed body. In a riverless season in Australia, the boundless grassland drives me crazy, for my skin is thirsty for the baptism of murky rivers, and my train of thoughts is chasing waves that can rush 1,000 miles a second. Listen, the lawn mower next door starts its routine, cutting hair for the spring, mourning for the season, hoping to find a fold in the ground. Where there is a fold, there is life running. In a season without language in Australia, I have lost my weight in undeveloped no person's land, like a wild devil roaming. I sow my language into the alien soil, where it sends forth strange flowers that no one recognizes. And all of a sudden, I find my tongue held between two languages like a vice. In a season of self-exile in Australia, I feel doubly alienated. The death of the old world has such weird attractions, while the light of the new world has somehow darkened. In a season without love in Australia, my body, my poetry. In a season without languages in Australia, my interference, my waves of electricity. In a season without death in Australia, I see the black cat acquiring an internal existence. In the afternoon sun, and I see the reflection of the car above the distant trees. In a season without imagination, in the desireless season in Australia, in Australia, in Australia. Thank you.
So this poem directly addresses the duality of straddling two cultures.
And I believe it was written in Chinese first, then self-translated.
And as a result, feeling alienated from both. How much is this sense of alienation a source of creativity for you?
It was it was quite pervasive, right since my arrival in Australia for many, many years. And I still remember having that interview with someone from Sydney Morning Herald in the early days, about 1996. I used the one word, pushed back. That's my feeling. That you live in a country, you just feel not welcome, but pushed back. No, we don't want you. No, please. That's the word. That's the key word. And for many years.
Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine it, but when I try to imagine it, I imagine that when someone migrates to another country and must then navigate strange, almost inexplicable customs and traditions, the sense of being other is extremely powerful. But I wonder, to what extent is this sense of otherness internalized, reflecting your internal view of the world, regardless of how that world is relating to you externally?
Well, it's a reflection of the external. The internal is always a reflection of the external. And the internalization of that is all poeticized in both Chinese and English languages across genres. This poem is only one example of that internalization.
If I can call it that, the poverty of exile is in the losses that you carry and in what you sense is missing. This poem was written not long after your arrival in Australia, which you refer to as self-exile, so presumably involved choice on your part. But I was wondering, has this poverty, this sense of alienation, diminished over time, or has it shifted so that, for example, you feel more alienated now from your original culture and less from your adopted one?
It's hard to say. It's gone. I guess it really doesn't have to do with Australia or China. Anywhere, one just feels one is alienated as a human being, particularly as someone who is caught in the language, in the two languages, as there's no way out of them. I guess that is what I feel about existence itself. So that sense stays with me to this day, and it generates many different reflections.
All right, would you like to read your next poem?
And that is intensified in my second collection, Songs of the Last Chinese Poets. This is Canto 23. To be nameless, to be without a state, to be free as freedom itself, to be able to detach oneself from any responsibility of nationality, to be left entirely on oneself to live it out, to be aware of all the futilities as the most expensive plane slides to its destruction, to be wordless for days and days and days, to be without anyone who can even be called attachable by a telephone cord, to be deathless while living a death, to hear the rustles of the dry wind of April and think of something that happened somewhere before, to be unable to put anything down for fear of emptying the memory, to feel the impossibility of crossing the boundary as thin as a skin, to be able to see with an eye self-trained for unspeakable subtleties, the age-old rock that blocks the way of eternity, to traverse centuries of alienation and humility, to become a third dimension. That was in 1997, but actually I spent over the 3 years and a half while I was working on my PhD, I was able to write the whole book. And it has a lot to do with the research and my own living in Australia, too.
I was curious about the notion to be free as freedom itself. Is this poem in some way exploring the potential of otherness as a gift?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, either as a gift or as mostly a gift. Yeah. And one was caught between staying and going back. Mm-hmm. So it's all reflected there and inflects there as well.
So there was a period of uncertainty.
Very uncertain period of time for me.
Mm. Are you suggesting in this poem that the state of otherness, of straddling cultures and identity, sharpens perceptions, gives you more depth or substance?
It absolutely does. And in those early days, those 4 to 5 years, it just implodes with a plethora of images.
Hmm. Do you think that not only are you other in the sense that you don't belong, but that you are other in the sense that you are changed by the status and become other to who you were, other to yourself?
It's a process of being othered and becoming more other, not only to others, but to myself, to my own former country. And this is why I received a shock when I returned to China in 1995, because I found there was a distance between myself and my countrymen, my country people.
All right. Do you want to read the next one?
Yeah. Now this one was basically every time I go out in Australia and in other countries and in other cities, I catch a cab, I enter into a conversation with the cab driver, then I end up getting 1 or 2 or 3 poems. It's so lovely because in Australia, where do you get so many cab drivers to talk to, from India, from Pakistan, from Iraq, from Poland, from Greece? They talk, they're so open to the strangers like me. I don't tell them that I'm a poet, I'm just a passenger. So we just start talking about anything. And my conversation with people from all over the world, wherever I travel, they end up getting into my poetry. The other thing is, I really am, at times, very unsatisfied with Australian poetry as I read it. Because the one word I use is boring. I have to be very open about what I think. A lot of the poetry is very interesting to me. I need to find interesting conversations. I need to turn them into poetry. Anyway, this is a guy I met in London. Listening to the big bus guy in London, he said he'd come along with us to the underground and tell us how to get to Wembley Park or Central. As he lurched along the Marble Arch, I asked, "Are you Indian?" He said, "I was born here. My parents are Indian. But you know what? If I go to India, where I have never been, they'd call me a foreigner. Even when I'm here, they call me a foreigner because of my skin color." Funny it is that when I was in Brazil, where I was a month ago, they thought I was a local. Again, because of my skin color. It is the identity, very confusing. I don't know who I am or what I am. I've been on this job for only 6 weeks. Already I think of giving up. It's tiring, talking like that every day and nobody noticing me. Where are you from? Australia? Oh, I know. You have great food there. and great variety. I'd love to go there one day, if only for the food. At Baker Street, we said goodbye. I on my way to Wembley Stadium, he on his, to an undisclosed destination, quite far from the city. It's paler than an Indian skin. His big brooding eyes struck me fleetingly as an academic who went home, having just delivered a speech on unthinkable confusions of contemporary identity.
You share the unthinkable confusions of contemporary identity with millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of people. Even if the individual experience is vastly different, do you find a kind of gravitational pull towards others who have experienced something similar, a heightened alertness to such people, if you like, a kind of identity radar?
Yeah, it's this kind of experience is quite different from my experience in China, because this opens up to the rest of the world, including many different countries. Whereas in China, I also write about my conversations with taxi drivers, but they're so different because these taxi drivers in China may have never been abroad. They may have only lived in their own city for life. So their stories are very much focused on their own domestic lives, city lives, and where people they know and places they know. But here with bus driver like that in London, his story is all over the place, which is why the identity issue is very confusing to him and to me too, as someone who travels all over the world and meets with all sorts of people. It's also part of the problem that my poetry somehow has to deal with in a confusing way, if it has to.
But are these encounters comforting or validating or confusing or confronting or?
I don't care. If it is good, it impressed me at the moment, I take it down. It's left for the readers to work out what meanings they have. It's for the readers. And I, as someone, a human recorder of the events that happen as they happened. And what you get is what you see is what you get here. You can work out each reader's perception and reading experience must be different from others. I don't want to make it a unifying thing that there's only one conclusion. Now, this is my personal experience of the event and my personal way of writing about it.
So your job is to catch the poem, if you like, that's there.
Exactly. To catch the poem from the lips of that person who instantly disappeared, never to return. And there's no way of identifying him and finding him again. There's no need for that either.
No. Do you want to read another one?
Comma is such an easy thing. Poetry, as easy as breathing, as easy as going out into the sun, as easy as scratching an itchy spot on your own body. Why bother remastering? That's so difficult, so boring. Why bother becoming someone you don't recognize? Except electronically, poetry, fingers put under the nose, fingertips, wingtips. Or should I end everything with a comma? A sun comma, a scratch comma. Oh, a breathing comma. No, a thin breathe. What's that? Anything can be anything else except sun. A magnifying glass, a teacup, mug. Leave them over, words. Published, then dumped. overlordship, 国主, river sounds, self-demotion like poetry, as invisible as breath. Comma.
So I enjoyed that. I enjoyed your reading of that because I read all of the poems out loud, but your reading of that poem is completely different from my reading of that poem out loud and so much more interesting. Thank you. Is poetry an easy thing?
It is, and it isn't. I'll tell you what, it's not as if I don't revise. Sometimes I did the poetry book in Chinese that's revised so many times, sometimes 7 times. And it's very interesting. The revised poems as compared with poems that have never been revised. That's for the academics to study. Mm. But it all depends on the mood. Sometimes you're in that mood of not happy with anything. Or you want to go back to it again and again. But there's something I don't want to revise. For example, my poems written when I was when I was 20 or 25 in English. Yeah. Now, rereading them, I can see a lot of places I can revise, but I stop doing that. I tell myself to stop doing that. Why? You can't revise youth.
Yeah, it loses.
You did something when you were 20.
Yeah.
Now you're 65. You want to? No, I think that's raping the young man. Mm. Even though that young man is yourself. In his 20s, he did that. Leave him as he was.
Yeah, yeah.
I think our idea of perfection is wrong. When you are young, there's nothing perfect. You constantly make mistakes. And your poetry, when you wrote them, it's a reflection of that. Leave it as it was. That's my view. I'm not trying to change anyone's view. That's my view. And if I want to publish a collection of the poems I wrote in China in English, even before I went overseas to any English-speaking countries, I'm not prepared to revise anything.
This poem, comma, is in short, clipped phrases. It is full of full stops and questions and then one solitary comma at the end. The comma, to me, suggests that the poem is unfinished, that it is a work in progress. Is that a metaphor for identity?
And no, that is the impression I wanted to create. And you know what? Actually, I had inspiration when I translated a Malaysian Muslim poet. His name Muhammad something. I forgot the full name. But when I reached the end of that poem in my translation, I received a shock. Why? Because the whole poem ended with a comma. I thought it was a mistake. They should have revised that by changing the comma to a period. But I thought a comma at the end of a poem works beautifully.
Yes, very
great. It's a great idea. I've never come across anything like that. I thought I could use any other punctuation too, instead of a comma or a period. Anything that is strange, unusual, could end the poem. But anyway, that one, I was very inspired by him, which is part of the reason of doing that. And also, when I wrote the poem, comma, I was teaching creative writing in the Shanghai-based university. One big problem is with the students' writing, it's full of mistakes. What can you do? Do you want to correct everything? No, I want to play with it because it's great creative and innovative sparks that their writing gave you. And you could take advantage of the mistakes. And so in that poem, in that collection, leading after this, there's a lot of deliberate poems deliberately written wrongly, full of mistakes.
Mm.
And I really like the notion of mistakes. And I am preparing a collection of wrong poems, mistaken poems. Because we are too much into perfection. We want to correct everything. No, you can't. We are poets. If you want to be a poet, you got to be wrong because you're wrongly born as a poet.
All right. Do you want to read your next poem? Is Someone.
Someone is having a morning coffee. Someone is typing up an email letter to send somewhere. Someone is glancing out the window at the blue September sky. Someone is doing something. Someone is faxing something somewhere. Someone is receiving a phone call from someone else. Someone is dialing a number, but that number is busy. Someone is going to the toilet. Someone is doing something. Someone is walking upstairs for an exercise. Someone has chosen the lift. Someone is going down. Someone is coming up. Someone is opening a large parcel containing poetry submissions. Someone is writing a rejection letter to a novelist. Someone is thinking of someone else. Someone is doing something. Someone is having a little hangover. Someone is chatting on the side. Someone's mobile phone is ringing. Someone's laptop has just crashed. Someone is restarting. Someone is getting technical support and listening to the recorded messages. Someone is running whose high heels are being heard. Someone is turning his head. Someone is having fun. Someone is approaching 50. Someone is approaching 23. Someone is doing something. Someone is going to have a smoker outside the building. Someone is worried about his marriage. Someone is looking forward to her upcoming wedding ceremony. Someone is alive. Someone is doing something. Someone misses yesterday's fish. Someone is checking and rechecking a large sum of money. Someone is having a meeting. Someone is listening to birds sing on his DVD. Someone is pouring tea into a pot of frangipani. Someone is doing something. Someone is looking at his screen. Someone is stretching his legs and arms. Someone is a little unhappy about a difficult client. Someone has just lost in the stock market through a lack of sleep. Someone turns his head to see the enormous head of an airplane near his window. Someone is meeting someone.
Everyone is someone. And everyone alive is always in the middle of doing something. I'm interested in your choices in this poem of the many things people are doing and in the things that you have left out. For example, no one in this poem is dreaming. In a poem like this, how do you choose what to include and what to exclude?
It's very interesting, your response to this poem. And someone else in Adelaide, when she read the poem, she was saying something about it. But this poem is specifically about a major event in history. It's about 9/11. You'll notice that there's a September sky. The blue September sky in the third line. And you'll notice the enormous head of an airplane near his window. So it's actually about someone sitting by his window and turns his head to see the enormous head of the airplane already at the window.
Yeah, the clues are there.
Yeah. So someone is meeting someone. The rest of it is history. So it's all about someone, all sorts of people doing all sorts of things in the lead up to that moment the head of the plane is right at the window side. Something to be said about this. I have a habit of not writing anything when major things happen. Some people do have that habit. If a massacre took place, if something like 9/11 happened, the next day they produce something, but often very badly written. Because you need the emotion, you need the things to settle to a degree. And you can't do it deliberately for that purpose. Of course, if you want to do it, you can do it, but sometimes the result is not that satisfactory. But this one, when I wrote it, is nearly a month after the event, after 9/11. When I was today, I'm facing you, facing the window. When I wrote that poem, I was facing the other direction. I was working on something. When in my imagination, I thought I just accidentally turned my eyes towards the window, and in that moment, fleeting moment, I imagined I saw the head of the airplane. And that one, I took it down, and the poem was formed and done, written.
Yeah, thank you. I should have cottoned onto that, but I didn't. So
no, that's fine. That's fine. That's the beauty of it, because if you make it plain, it's no good. You have to make it readable on different levels.
Yeah, and this is what I've called the mystery of poetry. I mean, there's got to be something.
You're right on that point, because you know what? I submitted this to a U.S. magazine. It was published. It was accepted, published, and then in the 10-year anniversary, it was republished in that magazine. But the editor told me that one of his readers read this, he actually stood up in his chair out of shock, because he experienced the moment in which he was seeing the head of the plane right at the window. And it's gone, so obviously. And that shock moment could never be had.
Yeah.
Only by accident. Can only be had by accident. You can't deliberately go in search of it. This is what is good about poetry. A poet has to be weird. Has to be that weird, so naturally. Has to be naturally weird enough to experience all sorts of things that what a normal human being can't.
It's interesting too, there's a juxtaposition between the momentousness of that event and the fact that everyone in that poem, pretty much everyone in that poem, is doing something ordinary or even mundane.
That has got to be ordinary. It's not as if everyone is alerted to the fact that they're going to be killed instantly. No, everybody's doing is ordinary things.
So in one way,
that is what makes the tragedy so tragic. Yeah, to the people that it hasn't happened to.
And it's also a commentary on the significance of the insignificant.
Yeah, well put. Thank you. Exactly. Yeah. It's got to be like that.
All right. Wonderful. Can we have another poem, please?
Yeah, I at one stage I had so many dreams. Like Graham Greene, he wrote a book based on his dreams. But I didn't read that book. But I put all those poems in the book, and when it was published, it was titled "Reality Dreams." So it's like those reality shows, not real shows, but reality shows, reality dreams. The very first poem in that book is Reality Dreams, the Flight. She and I were waiting. She went past me with luggage. I followed her. I heard the flight's noise. Now the hall. Now the outside space. She disappeared. I stood alone. She appeared at the doorway, exactly as 40 years ago. Energetic, picture-perfect smile, cigarette voice, half of her face lit up in red. She said, "This way," and went inside a side doorway. Where there was another old lady, I followed her. She turned around and faced me. Her smile, picture perfect, became motherly. I held out my hands and cried, "Mother!" She disappeared, leaving white bones in my arms.
You know, there's some journals that won't take poems about dreams. I don't know why. You mentioned the title of the book and the reality dreams. It's a contradiction in terms, though, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and that's why I put it there.
But
it's like dreams are reenacted.
But I sometimes wonder whether it is a contradiction in terms, because we live inside our heads, which are a jumble of histories, memories, perceptions, cultures, experiences, imaginings, dreams, identities, constructs, and so on. And I think, I don't know if you agree with this, that the border between reality and dreams is porous. Sometimes we don't know which is which.
No, this let me from my personal experience, the reason why I was able to write poems like that was I don't know. I mean, these days I have so many dreams, but by the time when I wake up, no trace is left. I can't remember anything, even though when I woke from a dream, I remember it so vividly. But by the morning when I wake up, it is no trace. But in those days, there were traces of the dreams that were very vivid in my memory. I can remember them. Yeah, you can say they are memories. They're memories of dreams, dreams as memorized and written. So I simply, as I can still remember them, I made it a habit of recording them in words and making them into poems. So it's a very simple thing that I did, and nowadays I can't do it anymore, simply because my memory, my aging memory can't retain anything whatsoever.
Well,
so that is lost forever.
Well, or the reverse, it's got so much in there.
Yeah. There's nothing to.
You're full up.
You can't put in anymore. Yeah, no, that's true too.
I mean, in within this dream, there is for me a very powerful sense of loss. We carry the baggage of a lifetime of losses within us, and they never really go away. Is this poem a kind of salute to that baggage, a re-encounter with loss?
It's more to my way of thinking about the death. That is my parents. This is about my mother. My mother is dead many years, since 2000, I think, 20 years. But dream has a particular quality in which the dead people come alive. That's something that never happens outside the dream. But of course, you can daydream, but in a dream, the dead people come back to life, and that is the most mysterious thing about it. So I write. Yeah, that's to me, it's something I can't explain, and this somehow taps into the Chinese way of paying respects to their dead. You know, when comes the grave sweeping day, they just pay the respects by preparing meals, prepare the meals they take to the graveside as if the dead will consume them.
Mm.
Logically, that doesn't make sense. But year after year, they do that all the time. They bring the paper money because they think they can use it in the underworld.
Well,
So there is a connection between the dead and the living, which is good for literature, for poetry.
Yeah.
Again, a normal logical person would dismiss that as just nonsense.
Well,
but it happens to everyone.
It does happen to everyone. And
Yeah.
what you're describing about making the meals and taking the paper money, that's the power of ritual for the living, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. And people don't want to miss that. Not miss a day. Every year they do that.
Mm.
But when I, as someone, disconnected with that kind of life, having lived in here for 30 odd years, I've never done that.
Mm.
Shame on myself. I blame myself for having lost that tradition.
Except that your parents presumably are in China and you're here, so it's a bit hard to do.
Correct. Yeah, they're in China. Yeah.
Mm. Well, you've got 2 more poems. Would you like to read the next one?
My poetry has turned sour from back to worse. I don't know how to write poetry. Whenever I think of prize that lie ahead of me and of the famous ones that are certain to win them, I become tedious. I find poetry irrelevant, as I said to a friend over the phone this afternoon in Chinese, using a Chinese proverb. Poets are broken parts that break themselves brokenly. Meaning what? Meaning that since they are broken, they can afford to break themselves more, making the noise with the ever-diminishing pieces. I look at my poetry. It certainly looks like broken pieces that do not even make a noise. I write with a sense of ever-growing futility and failure, like the life itself, as it seconds towards this, my poetry.
I'm sorry, but I had to laugh when I read this poem, because you've written 139 books in the last 30 years, which suggests to me that you A, do know how to write, B, that it's not a failure. But anyway, your writing is really...
No, you have to listen to you have to hear my story about this particular one.
All right.
Now, I must be the most rejected person in this part of the world, I have to say. This terminally poetic, this book, I can show you, it was prepared and ready to go before 1999. Everything was prepared and ready to go, to submit. I submitted everywhere, was all rejected until I completely forgot about it. I don't even remember I had a manuscript, because it's completely gone out of my memory, until one day I was searching for something else and I bumped into it and I thought, oh my God, I still got that. And then I thought of a publisher. I thought, why not? I just check it out, like rubbish, If no one wants it, who cares? Check it out. And this is something that is so strange. Overnight, I received an email from the publisher, and it's a letter of acceptance. That's the very first thing that happened in my life. It's never happened like that. It's always months, years and years, silence. But this one, that's the only time that happened. And then afterwards, it happened again. It's completely, I don't know. I have no words to describe it. That's what happened 20 odd years ago. 1999 is done. And now it's a dead corpse. Dug out of the grave on my head. And it's a reflection of all the failures I had. Because everything of mine gets rejected in this country, by this country. I have to say.
Can I say that you're not alone?
I'm sure I'm not alone. I'm sure I'm not alone. Yeah, exactly. We all have that fate. That's why I said a poet is wrongly born. I was wrongly born as a poet. I should have been born as someone else, but I am who I am now. What can I do about it?
Yeah.
So read my poetry full of mistakes because I'm already a mistake.
One thing that I've been sort of fascinated in the conversations I've had with poets now for a number of years is that all of them, without exception, no matter how successful, no matter how many awards they've won, have an annoying sense of doubt about their work. It's remarkable. I thought it was just me, but it's just everyone.
Everyone.
Is doubt? Do you think doubt is necessary to your creative process?
Yeah, good. If you have doubt, write about it. That's me. If poetry is the best way of dealing with all sorts of problems, including doubt.
Mm.
Poetry is really good for dealing with all sorts of things. Until you realize you don't have to be bothered with whether it gets published or not.
Mm.
If you can accept that, then you're fine. It's the best medicine for all sorts of conditions.
Poetry is therapy.
Yeah, it's good therapy. Yeah, we should discard all the doctors and adopt the cheapest way of dealing with your problems. That is poetry. And that is something I could write down as a poem itself.
Mm.
Because I have never thought of that.
There you go. Straight after we finish.
Good because conversations lead to poetry.
Yeah, always.
Yeah.
Okay, we have one final poem, A Tale of Two Men.
A tale of two men together, they lived till they now are over 50. Back then, 20 years ago, not allowed to get married, they designed their own marriage certificate. With the certificate of marriage common in the 1980s. Together, they run the bookshop. Lee does deliveries, replenishments, errands, running around. Sun does counter sales, accounting, sorting in womanly neat order. Some words in their self-made certificate, no, not ever. Together, they share each other's clothes, shoes, all of the same size. Together, they bring up a son who calls Li Ba, second dad, and who calls Sun Su Su, uncle, and who now goes out with a girl. Some more words in the certificate, not if the sea goes dry and the rock rots. Together, they appear in the headline photo, two men holding their certificate, self-made, their faces in mosaic. A description of them and of their lives, piao piao, float float, dripped dripped, flutter flutter. Words that are gay, gay-like, forbidden even in English, until the language itself favors the marriage. In the newer China, everything seems possible. Nothing can stop us from getting all together now. Together, they say, echoing the expression in their certificate that goes, 白头偕老, keeping each other company with white heads, hair. A marriage for 20 years, unlikely for more. But I would like to write a letter to the editor, suggesting him to remove the quotation marks put on their marriage and telling him a bit about Mardi Gras in Australia's Sydney.
This tale is from your book, The Kingsbury Tales, which the title discloses a book of tales. What is the relationship for you between poetry and storytelling?
You see, this happened to be in the years when I went back to Wuhan which is the capital city of Hubei. And of course, it's world famous now.
Yeah.
Everyone knows Wuhan for bad reasons. But not in my days. When I was a professor at Wuhan University, I was writing a book called The Kingsbury Tales. And I had a rule set for myself from my reading experience. Any poems, if they go beyond one A4 page, if they have to be really riveting and good. Otherwise, I stop. So I confine myself to each and every poem I write within one A4 page, not longer than one A4 page, so that the attention can be sustained within the page, not go beyond. And the attention span is so short these days for the readers. You have to really work on what you try to write. And the whole collection is poems of stories or story poems about all sorts of things that happen in my life and in my reading experience. And this one was based on the newspaper story I read whilst in Wuhan. And it made me realize that something similar is happening in China, except not officially. Yeah.
When you consider making instantaneous poetry bilingually, is that less about language and more about being able to access two or more cultural perspectives, as you do in this poem with the reference to Sydney at the end?
I think it's both, because I didn't choose a poem from my bilingual collection published by Panchen Watman in 2019, which is the Flag of Permanent Defeat, which is a bilingual poetry collection. And a lot of poems are dealing with the language itself, because the language really hurt to the bones, and you live on a daily basis with both languages. And so your poetry has to live the same experience, so to speak.
Is there anything else?
Plus what Eva said.
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to say about your theme?
Not really, except that I do have a problem. I write too much. When it's like in 1 month I write about 200 poems in Chinese, and I haven't taken into consideration the English bits, which is about 100 or so. That's on a monthly basis. So for me, it's a big headache, because when I prepare a collection, I have to go through everything and say no to a lot of things. It's unbelievable. It's just wrong. It's all wrong,
I think it's a problem a lot of poets would like to have.
Yeah, it's a big problem.
Thanks so much, Ouyang, for sharing.
Thank you so much, David.
On the theme Poetry in the Making, From Mouth to Poetry, How to Make Instantaneous Poetry Bilingually. For information on Ouyang's many books, please go to the website, www.huangzoran.com. The link to that website will be available with this podcast. We will come back in a month's time to spend some time with Hani Abdillah on the theme of time. Look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.